All right, it's time for an update and forecast on the wolf fire. This is the fire perimeter. You see that there's some red, some yellow on this map. This is watch duty right here, which shows us there are some evacuation orders and warnings in place. That's a big part of the reason that we're covering this fire. Officially, it's up to 1,400 acres with 10% containment. Seems to have started around 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon. And I could show some images and videos of how active the fire was yesterday, but that's yesterday's news. And what we're more interested in is where is the fire actively burning now? Where is it expected to grow in the future? And really at the end of the day, how worried should we be? And the reason my worriedness level did jump up a little bit is because does look like we have some new evacuation warnings. So that could be that the fire is spread more throughout the day today, but that's what we're going to be answering throughout the course of this video. So before we actually kind of see where the fire is actively burning, first question is, where is the fire? Because we know it's Riverside County, but just in case you're not familiar with that, we can zoom out on this map. See Santa Monica over here to the west, we got Long Beach, Huntington Beach, and then if we go in almost directly to the east, we have the Wolf Fire in here, and Banning is the city to the north of it. And that's also why I have some concern on this fire. If there's a fire that pops up in the middle of nowhere, I usually don't cover it. But when I click on this map, those orange dots that are going on and off, those are structures. And you can see that there's a large amount of structures to the north of this fire. Now, if we take our ruler from the most recent fire perimeter to where we see those structures, it's not popping up, but it's about a mile. There we go. That one says 1.2 miles. But as we're going to see in a moment, some of the recent heat activity does appear to be a little bit closer than that. So there's the fire. There's Banning. That seems to be the area that's under threat right now. Then we got this 3D map that we can look at, which is pretty amazing. It even shows, like if we zoom in here, you can see the exact helicopters that are on this fire right now, dropping either some water. We've got some tankers that I've seen dropping some retardant. And then we have the fire itself right here. See Banning down here. And it's actually key that I said Banning down here, because that's actually our first little piece of good news on this fire. Fire likes to move uphill. The reason for that is it's able to preheat the fuels above the fire before the flames even get there. So then the fuel is already dry by the time the flames get there. The fire doesn't have to waste any of its energy getting rid of that moisture out of the fuels. They just combust right away. So that's a sciencey way of saying fire likes to travel uphill. It moves faster uphill, which means it's good news that Banning is actually downhill from this fire. And that looks to be the main direction that the spread has been recently. It looks like it's been spreading what would be to the east and uphill. So not taking a direct path towards Banning. So that is our 3D map, which is pretty interesting. Looks like we've got tanker right there about to go drop some retardant. Maybe tells us that the fire is still right on that hill. So when it comes to the resources, we've got 300 personnel, 4 helicopters, 70 engines, 2 dozers, 3 water tenders, 6 crews, 8 other assigned. And not included on that would be some of the aircraft that we know is on this fire because, well, we just saw it. The other thing we can do is look at the fire itself. And Alert California has all sorts of cameras all over the state. One of the best ways to figure out what's actively happening on a fire. And just based on this screenshot, you're not seeing a whole lot of activity. Now we can actually go into that camera, see what's been going on. I did a time frame over the last 6 hours. It looks like it was kind of smoldering this morning. And then as you get into the hotter part of the day, the drier part of the day, you do see that smoke start to increase. What's interesting though, is then it starts to decrease again, which usually does not happen. Usually once a fire starts kicking up in the afternoon, it can actually create some of its own winds because the heat from the fire creates rising air, and then air rushes in, and then that can push the fire, pick up burning embers, lead to increased spread, basically until those winds die down in the late evening or overnight. But as we're seeing on this fire, well, it definitely looks like it flared up this afternoon. It now looks like it's diminishing in activity, and The only real explanation I can say for that, since it wouldn't have to do with improving weather conditions, would be exactly what we're just seeing on this map, which is the aircraft and some of the crews that are working on this fire to diminish its activity. So that's our view of the fire. We could take one more view of the fire, and just to kind of put things in perspective, when we're talking about massive fires, like some of the ones that we've talked about in previous years, actually going all the way back to 2020, you'll see a smoke plume on the satellite imagery, and you'll see smoke covering large portions of the state. On this, you probably can't even tell where the fire is unless you pay very close attention. When the loop resets, watch this little puff right there. That's our fire. So that also shows that that little puff of smoke was earlier in the day, and you're not seeing an increase in smoke activity now that we're getting into the afternoon. Interestingly, I don't know what these orange flashes are on the map over here. If anyone in the comments knows what's going on with that, I would love to know. What we're more interested in is that right there. That is the wolf fire. See a little flash and then seems to go away. Now, one other thing that is very useful, other than just trying to see what the smoke looks like, is we can actually look at some of the heat detections, because the heat detections will be more recent information than our fire perimeter. So that's our most recent fire perimeter. I believe if we zoom in, it'll even say what time that fire perimeter is from. Oh, I seem to have made it freak out. So I'm going to try to reload this page. And let's go modus and veers. Okay, I'm just going to click out of that, and let's see if we can open it back up again. Maybe I have too many tabs open at this point. We'll see if that one pops up. But in the meantime, we can look at the weather forecast for today. So this column is today's weather forecast. That's going to be tonight. That is tomorrow. So that red line is the temperatures today. See, it's quite warm, getting up into the mid-90s. I chose Banning as the place that we're doing the weather forecast for, because that's our closest city. So the main weather features we always look at with fires is hot, dry, and windy. If you're checking those boxes, it's going to be high fire danger. Hot, we definitely check that box, mid-90s. Windy, it's not terrible, but it's also pretty windy out there. You see, it's around 15 mile per hour sustained, which means 25 mile per hour gusts. What I would say is at least encouraging is it looks like the wind isn't really picking up a whole lot as we get later into the afternoon, which can happen, especially where you have some topographical influences. Looks like that wind is basically steady for the next 48 hours. And then a similar story is with how dry it is. See, it's quite dry out there. Anytime you see relative humidity drop into the teens, that's going to dry out the fuels, makes it easier for the fire to spread. But it doesn't look like it's getting all that much drier as we get into this afternoon. We're hovering right around 19 to 20%. So it is hot, dry, windy. It just doesn't look like things are going to be getting much worse over the next couple of hours, which is good, because when we're looking at the camera, it looks like they're already starting to handle the weather conditions that we have right now. So that's all to say. Right now, the fire actually looks pretty decent. My concern would have been if later in the afternoon it's going to get a lot hotter, a lot drier, a lot windier, but that doesn't seem to be the case either. Now let's see if our CalTopo kind of refreshed itself. It looks like it did. Yeah, we can all be kind of like that sometimes. So there's a wolf fire. Let's go just perimeter on this. So there it is. There's Banning. Now what we can do is do modus and veers. This shows some of the recent hotspots. And it does look like there has been increased heat activity to the north of the previous fire perimeter. So while this map was showing the fire just up in this hill right here, maybe even call that a mountain, this map, which shows some of that red closer towards Banning, would make us think that maybe the fire has pushed down into this area somewhat. So it's perhaps not that 1.2 miles away from some of these structures that we were measuring earlier, but it actually might be around maybe 0.5 miles. So we could take it from some of those heat detections and look at where maybe more of those streets are. And I don't know, usually takes a second to pop up. My guess is it's going to be, around half a mile to 0.75 miles. So heat detection's closer than the previous fire perimeter. But again, I don't think I would be too alarmed just because we're not seeing a whole lot of heat activity coming off of the fire. The other one we can do, which is going to be less accurate, it always over exaggerates the heat, but it's helpful, is the all satellites. And this at first looks terrible. It looks like the fire has moved over Banning. That's not the point of this map. Sometimes it can just be picking up heat that's in the smoke. I would actually say this is good news because when I first looked at this about an hour and a half ago, there were red portions on this. And the fact that that red has transitioned to yellow shows that there's actually been a decrease in heat activity on the fire. So based on a lot of the information that we have, the fire was active this afternoon. It looks less active now. We do have hot, dry, windy conditions, but when we look at the direction those winds are coming from, it's very westerly, which is going to try to push the fire more towards the east. The scariest wind would be if we had a very southerly wind, which would be trying to push this fire directly towards Bannon. That's not the case. So while our weather forecast, on any other day, that's pretty bad. Mid 90s, 25 mile per hour wind gusts, relative humidity in the teens. The fact that they're handling it already, and we've seen a decrease in activity into this afternoon, shows that we might not be, I'm not as worried about this right now as I was when I first looked at this about an hour and a half ago. With that being said, obviously it's California, fuels are dry. There are some challenges in that weather forecast, so definitely going to be keeping a close eye on this, and I'll let you know if anything